I'm Christopher Magnan. I'm a program manager at GDIT and work for different government agencies. And the focus of this talk is the Internet of Things cybersecurity. And this is a hot area, being that IoT is transforming the way business is conducted, and just the explosion in sensors that help automate many of our daily processes throughout the home, throughout work. And municipal agencies are implementing IoT for such applications as smart cities, as well as other data mining capabilities. So here is the agenda for today. I'll just give a brief introduction on IoT, the growth trends and projections. Why are we interested in cybersecurity and Internet of Things? The current state of the cyber posture, prominent IoT breaches. Some are pretty humorous from my perspective, and some hardening strategies that includes technology and lifecycle management, as well as implementing best practices. And the key takeaways, what I hope you'll take away from this presentation. So I beg your pardon about the logo in the lower right-hand corner. This was just an old slide template that I used, and I gave this presentation, or a derivative of this presentation, to another organization. And so, as I mentioned before, Internet of Things is a very hot area. It's a network of sensors that are designed to collect and process data, as I mentioned before, to automate operations, event detection. Many organizations are using data mining for their business practices, and also to pivot to new capabilities. For example, your hotels are adding apps to control your room temperature, as well as add reminders and other devices in the hotel room. And as I mentioned before, smart cities is an exciting and growing application of IoT. Also, self-driving cars. I probably heard a lot of activity with Google and Apple implementing their capabilities, and industrial automation, helping firms optimize their processes to make manufacturing cheaper, faster, better. And the backbone of IoT is being driven by cloud computing, your AWS, your Azure, your Google Cloud. It's making the computation, the IT infrastructure overhead, it's driving the costs down. Your 5G, you're expanding your network backbone across the nation. You're able to increase the data capacity of the communication channel. You're able to use direct adaptive antenna arrays to significantly pinpoint the beam storage for high data rate applications and other technical advances. Your processing power is getting cheaper, your memory is getting cheaper, and these are all catalyzing the IoT adoption. And as I mentioned before, the business case from an executive point of view is that it lowers costs, your automation, your data mining. It enables new service capabilities, like you mentioned before. It allows firms to pivot to new services, and it helps drive a wedge between leaders in different business sectors, drives the wedge in between. However, the key point I like to stress is that the cybersecurity, the hardening, the protection has not kept pace with the adoption of the technology. And I will send these slides out. So if you have any questions, you can also reach out to me, or we can discuss it after this presentation. So growth trends and projections, why are we interested? There is approximately 4.5 trillion Saudi reals in expected commerce in 2022, with a compound annual growth rate on 13.6 between 2017 and 22. This was taken from a report based on past data, and right now we're approaching 2021, and I haven't seen an update on this forecast. And Ericsson expects 3.5 billion cellular IoT connections in 2023. And KPMG, a management consulting firm, expects the Internet of Things will drive the greatest business transformation over the next 3 years. And another key point I'd like to acknowledge is that 90%, very high percentage of business executives expect IoT to become critical to a portion of their business capabilities and operations. So moving on, as I mentioned before, the pace of cybersecurity adoption has not kept pace with the IoT adoption. And I like to point everyone to the vulnerability gap, which is the unsecured devices. And so just using the 30% year-over-year growth that was mentioned in many articles, as you can tell, the vulnerability gap just widens as more firms adopt the technology. And some common deficiencies, passwords are not updated from the default setting. And those are exploited by hackers. Firmware and patches are not periodically updated, especially when the sensors are outside the secure perimeter. For example, you have cameras that are external to a data center, such as your local law enforcement, and those are outside the secure perimeter, which makes them more vulnerable. And it is harder to update any patches or firmware. And that gets into the next point. The wireless nodes are outside the physical security boundary. And surveys of these same executives show that the organizations don't know how to manage the IoT devices. They deploy them, and they don't even periodically assess their cyber readiness or their vulnerability. And as I mentioned before, best practices are not properly implemented, monitored, and managed. This is through the system lifecycle or the security lifecycle. I'll get more into this later in this slide. And a majority of IoT devices deployed are not cyber ready. Many firms, they manufacture sensors. However, there's not really a demand to implement cyber readiness. Many devices are passive without any password protection or any patches, or the firms don't update any security vulnerabilities. It's not in their best interest, and there's some strategies readily available that can help partition these devices from the core network and help reduce cyber vulnerability. And anyone that has taken the CISSP course or has passed the certification know that there are three segments to cybersecurity: the technology, the policy, and the training or the people. And many organizations do not properly train their staff. You have heard many times of the phishing schemas implemented by hackers, where they'll send a fake email which downloads any worms or viruses to the local machine and staff. Right now, we're facing a deficit of cybersecurity staff just because the training, or people don't pursue the training, and or many staff are not, or many people are not entering college or vocational school or any technical training to improve their cyber readiness. And the technology, as I mentioned before, is not properly maintained. Technology is not lifecycle refreshed out. As I mentioned, sensors are deployed but never managed. And so that is the state of cyber readiness for many organizations that deploy IoT. And as I mentioned before, here are some prominent IoT security breaches. As I alluded to before, malware penetrated through the system through using common username and password, which caused a distributed denial of service. One thing, or one breach that is very ironic, is the casino data leak. Hackers access the customer records through a temperature sensor in an aquarium. Whoever designed that system did not properly address any cybersecurity best practices. And from what it looks like, the core IT group did not even know about it. And of course, the Jeep Cherokee hack, which compromises people's safety if people can or hackers can access vehicles to remotely control them. And as one person mentioned, IoT is a bridge into the enterprise network that hackers are able to exploit. So you can add any recent security breaches in the chat window. As Eric mentioned before, I'll address any questions at the end of this presentation. And one thing that I did not add to the slide is with COVID and the medical system monitoring remotely patients, that also increases the number of opportunities for hackers to exploit vulnerabilities. So you can answer that question in the chat. And for those that aren't aware of what cybersecurity is, it's the defense against criminal or unauthorized use of data or networks. It's just keeping people who could compromise your technology, your operations, or sell any business critical information to unwanted sources. And as I mentioned before, it integrates technology, policies, and training. And there is a common theme called the Cia Triad, and that's how a cybersecurity solution is measured. Confidentiality, how secure is the data, how the integrity, if the data is corrupted by the process, or if it is altered, and availability, how readily you can access the data if you don't have to address multiple passwords or cards, etc. And as cybersecurity or IoT technology evolves, so do the threats through new technology, new methodologies, practices, and just detecting new vulnerabilities. As I mentioned before, the IoT is seen as a bridge into the enterprise network just because it's not properly managed. And that's how many hackers access the enterprise through these sensors. Okay, so getting into the cyber hardening strategies, I alluded to the system lifecycle management. Zero Trust is an application of identity and access management, which implements a least privilege policy, certificate authorities, which uses a proxy to vouch for the authenticity of the device or the user, post connect access, such as your patching and your firmware and your management of the hardware, security event monitoring, training your employees how to detect any breaches and how to respond to them. For example, if you have someone trying to access your network, what are the next steps? Do you shut down that network segment? Do you notify the authorities? So that's just part of the entire security event monitoring. And finally, continuous training. People are also seen as vulnerabilities. And as I mentioned before, the email is the common thread to access the enterprise network by downloading malware. So getting into system lifecycle management, it's just a lifecycle that we use in many industry to plan the system use and maintenance from cradle to grave, and that also includes system design, system maintenance, system demolition, and unfortunately, many corporations implement Internet of Things through third parties. However, security is ignored, or the corporations don't understand the importance of cybersecurity, and they're not willing to pay for it. And also expand the design team. I have implemented this many times in my practice. And so when we expand the design team to cybersecurity, we develop the response plan, the cyber training plan, and we integrate best practices as well as evaluate technology for its cyber readiness, and also implement basic security protection. And as I mentioned before, increase cyber hygiene accountability. You identify who is responsible for what in the event of a breach. And you also identify who is responsible for what during routine maintenance, your patch cycles, your firmware upgrades, and as I mentioned before, the crisis response team, and asset management through the life cycle. And to monitor your success or your failures, develop a cyber scorecard in response to event management and any anomalies that occur, as well as your training and address any gaps in the lifecycle management. And as just for frame of reference, common framework includes ITIL. That lifecycle goes from system or service strategy all the way through continuous service improvement. And that's one of the benefits of having a scorecard. You can see what you've done wrong, what you've done well, and how you can improve. Okay, so here is the system lifecycle management framework. As I mentioned before, this is the lifecycle that many corporations use to plan the use, design, and disposal of system. And throughout this life cycle, I have added where the cyber team can get involved. if you review the slide, I have the cyber team getting involved in the first stage. Usually analysis, cyber team is not involved because that's just the overall strategy from a business level executive perspective. And with planning and design, you incorporate all the cyber tools that harden your system, your ACAS, your HBSS, your certificate authority, or your 802.1x. And just keep all the cyber professionals in the loop as you progress through the system design and development. And for testing, you include the cyber team for readiness. Many government organizations, they have authorization and accountability teams to ensure that the system is hardened cyber-wise. And continuous monitoring and training, those are the maintenance and operations. And as I mentioned before, event management, who does what, how to do it, who to contact, etc. And Cyber Scorecard, as I mentioned before, is a tool to help improve the posture. So here's an example of a cybersecurity scorecard. As you can tell, there are some key metrics that are identified, and this leads to a cyber vulnerability analysis. And it's broken down into different parameters, such as your patch management, your email security. This is a generic one. It's not correlated to an actual firm, so no firm will have any vulnerabilities exposed by this slide. And you can also add corrective action to this slide as well, and what your success criteria when you implement this correction. And the circle is not a life cycle; it's just to show the percentage of vulnerabilities, or however you want to design your scorecard. Now, getting into policy, as I mentioned before, Zero Trust is an identity and access management, such as your Active Directory or your administrative tools. As I mentioned before, it uses the strategy of least privilege, and it protects against the bad actors. It keeps people such as insider threats out, and it only gives people access who need it. And it also partitions the network into VLANs. For example, all the sensors that don't have the proper security capabilities, such as your temperature sensor, you can just partition it off of the network. So anybody who hacks the network through the sensor, they'll be less likely to access it if it's partitioned. And also firewalls, software or hardware, and access control lists. And a recent trend over the past 5 years is to use multi-factor authentication, which is who you are, what you own, and what you know. Who you are, biometrics, PII, or any other information that you would know. What you own, password or random code sent to your cell phone or your laptop or email, and what you know, such as a password that only you know. So digital certificates, they are a proxy. This is used for any wireless routing. It's very robust, however, it is expensive. And what this capability does is just let a third party implement a certificate onto a device, and that certificate authenticates the device with the network. And any devices without this certificate, they're either ignored or quarantined from the network. It's a fairly robust system, as I mentioned before, and we currently use it since we have very ad hoc systems. And this is just an example, just for your clarification. A node without a certificate accesses the communication with nearby devices, say it's a temperature sensor that's remotely connected through multiple hops in the network. And since it doesn't have the network access to the network, or communication with the network is denied. And on the bottom of the screen, if a node has the certificate, it's granted access and the handshake protocol is completed and it can communicate with the other nodes in the network. So asset management, this is a core area. As I mentioned before, many of the design teams, they don't include the cyber team. And so these systems are not properly STIGged. Old software versions are not updated and patches are not distributed through the network. However, this is costly as well. And as I mentioned before, this remediates any vulnerabilities and bugs. And a key trend that's recently come into fruition is the Comply to Connect, which automates these security updates. And based on the policy, the devices can be quarantined until the vulnerability is remediated. And this is the Plan, Do, Check Act for security event monitoring. As I mentioned before, you need to actively monitor the network and any activity logs for any breaches or events, determine the severity of the event between a low, medium, and a high. As I stressed before, any event remediation strategies, and identify who does what in the event of a security breach, and also identify who manages what during normal operation. And always document. Knowledge is power from my perspective. And you don't reinvent the wheel for a common security breach. And you can also test strategies by simulating events. This is a policy that has been adopted by many firms, just so everybody can gain experience, as well as identify any areas of improvement and adapt the policies to emerging threats as they evolve. And as I mentioned many times before, assess through the cyber scorecard. People are the weakest link in the security posture, as I mentioned before. So continuous refresher training, make sure that they are aware. You can also have also simulated events just to verify that the training is sticking. And again, adapt, educate, and establish a refresher policy. This is fairly straightforward. However, not many firms implement this policy. So you can discuss your training, your cyber training, and just a example from the Wall Street Journal of a recent or breach 2 years ago. The cyber staff and the engineering staff did not communicate. They operated in silos. So any vulnerabilities discovered by the cyber staff was not shared with the engineering staff. And so this caused a significant vulnerability with the operations of a power station in the Ukraine. So The key takeaways, as I mentioned before, analysts will predict significant growth in the near future. The security posture has not kept pace with the technology adoption, and solutions must incorporate best practices to mitigate any vulnerabilities and to control access internally and externally. And people are the weakest link in the cyber posture, so they must be continuously trained, whether on cyber best practices or just basic cyber awareness. And that's it. That's my contact info.